Thank you all for being here. For those I've not met, and like I said, I love it. I think I'm seeing a lot of new faces. So welcome. My name's Geoff O'Keefe. I'm the executive director of Zen Peacemakers, and this is part of our program we call core trainings, and it's something that we put together about maybe 3 years ago or so. And the idea was we've got deeper, longer, more committed trainings in Zen Peacemakers. There's a 16-month training course that is going to kick off again in the spring. That is a much bigger step, but we really wanted to offer some of the, it's aptly named, some of the core trainings of Zen Peacemakers uh, in a very, very accessible way to everybody. So we do this once a month. They're only an hour. We record them so that if you miss it, you can go see it again. They're free, no prerequisites whatsoever. And we mix up among four different topics that we really feel deeply are essential to Zen Peacemakers. Introduction to meditation, introduction to council practice, introduction to the three tenets, as Daikan's going to do this evening, and introduction to what is a somewhat unique approach to peacemaking that is part of Zen Peacemakers. And then we repeat. So we keep this going throughout the year. So that's what we're doing here. And I want to save all the time for Daikan, so I don't want to take it up too much. We offer all of this for free. Most everything we do is free to everybody. So I so appreciate your being here. We do live on donations. If you can help us out on the website, I will most appreciate it. But be sure to subscribe to the newsletter on the website. You can become a member for free. It takes about 30 seconds. You just fill out the little form and you're a member of Zen Peacemakers. But the newsletter will let you know about all of these events that are coming up in the future. Uh, I want to thank my friend Jim Daikan Bastien Sensei for coming again to lead this course, as he's done a number of other times. And I most appreciate his experience and wisdom and unique perspective on this topic. So I will mute myself, and Daikan, I'm going to pass the talking stick to you.
Okay, thank you, Geoff. And welcome everyone to this workshop on the Zen Peacemakers three tenets. So tonight I'm going to kind of walk you through the three tenets. I'll define them for you and provide some examples of some of the interactions between masters and their students around the issue of not knowing, bearing witness, and taking action or loving action. And then after we go through all that, at the end, we'll have a little vignette and you'll have an opportunity to kind of apply what you've learned by looking at an interaction between a senior monk and a junior monk and how the three tenets played out in terms of their situation. So let me start by saying that my teacher, Roshi Bernie Glassman, founded the Zen Peacemaker Order back in 1994, and part of founding the Zen Peacemaker Order was the articulation of the Zen Peacemakers three tenets. And the three tenets really inform much of what we do as Zen Peacemakers, not only in terms of our practice, but also in terms of our service to others. As you may know, the Zen Peacemakers are particularly known for engaged Buddhism, or what we call socially engaged Buddhism, where our practice is not for ourselves, but for the welfare and benefit of all beings everywhere in concert with the true Bodhisattva path. So the three tenets, as I mentioned, are not knowing, bearing witness, and taking action. But before I get into that, I want to talk a little bit about three basic Buddhist principles that kind of underlie all the things that I'm going to talk about this evening. And I'm sure if you are familiar with Buddhism, this will probably be a little bit of a review for you. But if you're new to it, it may be helpful to understand these things. The first one is the concept or idea of impermanence. Okay. So from a Zen Buddhist perspective, the entire universe and everything in it, including ourselves, both externally and internally, is constantly in a process of change. There are literally no such thing as nouns. I mean, that's a kind of a linguistic convenience, but everything is a process. Okay. Everything is a verb. Everything is unfolding. Okay. So think about that. The person you were when you signed on is not the person you are now. And the person you are now is not going to be the person you are 5 minutes from now, because you're part of this ever-changing, arising process of conditioned unfolding. The second principle is called emptiness. And it's also associated with what is known as dependent co-arising. And what that essentially says is that all phenomenon in the universe owe their existence to all of the other phenomena in the universe. There is nothing about you that is you. Everything about you is a function of everything else that is not you. Okay. So that's what we call emptiness. You can't identify anything that's solid, unchanging, and permanent. And everything is co-arising. So, and then the third is, if everything is impermanent and everything is arising as a result of conditions, then there's no self. There's no permanent, fixed, stable, unchanging self. Okay. So those are the three basic principles: impermanence, emptiness, and no self. Now, my teacher, Roshi Burney, was an aerospace engineer while he was ordaining to become a Zen priest. And he had a PhD in applied mathematics from UCLA, and he worked for McDonnell Douglas on the manned mission to Mars. And this was actually back in the 60s, early 60s. Bernie was a brilliant mathematician and engineer. So he had a real kind of mind for unpacking the secrets of the universe, so to speak. And one of the things he said, and I'll quote him, is, "We must realize that what we call events, people, or objects are just relationships, interactions of phenomena that reflect all other interactions of phenomena." And that was not only from a Buddhist perspective, but from a perspective of physics, essentially. So the first tenet is we're going to talk about is not knowing. And not knowing is letting go of fixed ideas about yourself, about other people, and about the entire universe. How many people here are familiar with the Four Noble Truths? Just kind of raise your hand real quick. Okay, so sounds like you guys are pretty familiar. All right, so briefly, I'll review. The Four Noble Truths is life is suffering. Suffering is due to attachment. There's a path out of suffering, and that path is the Eightfold Noble Path. Okay. So what I want to kind of highlight or emphasize is the second noble truth, which is attachment. And suffering is due to attachment. Okay. So when you look at kind of the Sanskrit word that's associated with that, what it depicts is a wheel where the hub of the wheel is stuck. And when the hub of the wheel is stuck, the wheel can't turn. In other words, it can't continue. It can't move forward. It can't move from where it is down the road to the next place. And it's a metaphor for fixed ideas. That when we are fixated on our ideas, I, my, me ideas, okay, then that separates us from everything that's unchanging and evolving due to conditions. And we try to hold on to a situation that by its very definition has to change. And so the degree to which we hold on to it, we suffer. And to the extent that we involve other people in that process, we cause them to suffer. Okay. So the first tenet is not knowing. And what is not knowing? Letting go of fixed ideas. Okay. Doesn't mean ideas aren't important, or they're not valuable, or they're not useful, but they have an actual limited capability to unveil and reveal the actual nature of reality. Here's an example. If you've never had chocolate before, I could try and explain that to you. I could say, well, it's creamy and it's sweet and it's yummy. I think you're really going to like it, but none of the words that I could ever try to convey the actual experience of chocolate to you would ever even get close to you understanding and knowing what chocolate is. The only way I can really help you understand and know what chocolate is to put a piece of chocolate in your mouth. And when that chocolate is in your mouth, that direct experience is like, that's chocolate, right? Now, that's a very simple example, but you can extrapolate that out to the function of all language. Language, by its very nature, is limited in its ability to express reality. Unfortunately, it also is extremely valuable to help us navigate our daily life, right? If we couldn't think, conceptualize, compare and contrast, et cetera, we'd have a hard time getting through the day. So language is a tool, but part of the problem with language is that by the time we become a fully functioning adult, we depend on it so much that we forget that it's only a provisional rendering of what direct experience actually entails. Zen is about being with direct experience, tasting the chocolate. So let me share a little story. So this is a very famous koan regarding Bodhidharma, the 28th patriarch, who attained enlightenment in India and then traveled to China in like the 600s, 700s century, I mean. And he was summoned to the court of Emperor Wu. And Emperor Wu was a big proponent of Buddhism. And he had been funding the building of temples and supporting the Sangha and really investing and encouraging the Chinese people to embrace Buddhism. And so he was thrilled, to actually meet an enlightened Zen master from India. And so when he met Bodhidharma, the first thing he did is he shared with Bodhidharma all the wonderful things that he had done to promote Buddhism in China. And because Emperor Wu understood the notion of karma, which is if you engage in really good activities, you gain a certain amount of merit, and that merit can benefit you in this life and maybe the next life. So with that understanding, Emperor Wu said, after telling Bodhidharma all the things he'd done, what merit have I gained? And Bodhidharma said, none whatsoever. Imagine what that must have done to the emperor's sense of self. So then the emperor said, oh, okay, well, what is then the highest holy truth? In other words, if it's not karma and merit, what is it? And Bodhidharma said, vast emptiness, nothing holy. And then the emperor said, well, who are you then? Who are you? And Bodhidharma said, don't know. Now, why would he say that? Anyway, that kind of ended the conversation. The emperor didn't know what was said or didn't quite understand what was going on. And Bodhidharma left and crossed the Yellow River and sat front of a wall in the Shaolin temple for 9 years doing Zazen. Interestingly enough, a number of years later, Huike, who was his first successor, went to Bodhidharma and said, Master, please help me. My mind is roiling with ideas and concepts, and I can't bring any peace to my mind. Can you please help me? And Bodhidharma said, well, show me your mind and I'll help you. I'll pacify it for you. And Huike said, well, I've been thinking and thinking and thinking and thinking and looking and looking and looking and looking, and I can't find it anywhere. And Bodhidharma said, there, I've pacified your mind. And when he said that, Huike woke up. See, if you've ever been on a 7-day Zen retreat, or even a 2-day, or even, a 2-hour session, depending, on how new you are to the practice. But on a 7-day Zen retreat, you're literally sitting in front of a wall, about 2 to 3 feet in front of you, for like 14 hours a day. Okay. And believe me, everything that you've ever thought of or could ever think of just kind of comes up. Okay. Until you get to a point where all your concepts, ideas, evaluations, conceptions, perceptions are exhausted, just completely exhausted. And when that happens, you realize your true nature. That's not knowing. That's touching the absolute and tasting not knowing. The mind before thinking. There's a really book you may have, it's called what's it called? 101 Zen Stories, I think is the name of it. And one of my favorite stories in there is about a university professor who was an academic and spent his whole career studying Buddhism and had written books about it and articles and was published and was featured at conferences on Eastern religion, et cetera, et cetera. And he finally had an opportunity to travel to Japan and gain an audience with an actual enlightened Zen master. And when he met him, the Zen master was sitting at a little table and there was a pot of tea and a couple of cups. And the professor sat down, and after they introduced each other, the professor, started to regale the Zen master on all the things, that he had been wanting to talk to a Zen master about his whole life. And the Zen master just kind of sat there and didn't really say anything. So eventually the professor kind of ran out of gas. You ever go on and on and on, and the person doesn't respond, eventually you kind of wake up to the fact that, this person isn't really engaging with me right here. So finally the professor stopped and said, well, what do you think? And the Zen master said, would you like some tea? And the professor said, yeah, I would love some tea. He said, hold out your cup. So he held his cup out, and the Zen master poured the hot tea until it flowed over the top of the cup onto the professor's hand. And he pulled back his hand and he said, whoa, why did you do that? And the Zen master said, you came here to learn about Zen, but you're so full of your own ideas. Nothing else can go in right now. You need to empty your cup. In other words, return to not knowing. Dogen Zenji, who is the started the Soto Zen sect, which is a prominent Zen sect in Japan, and where the Zen Peacemakers are in the lineage of Dogen Zenji. He went to China for 6 years after feeling dissatisfied with what he was able to understand under the Japanese Zen masters who were alive at that time. And after he had a huge awakening in China, he came back and he kind of wrote this kind of practice manifesto. It's called the Fukan Zazengi, Universal Recommendations for Zazen or Zen Meditation. And I just want to share with you one of the key passages from that writing in regard to practice. He says, once you've adjusted your posture, take a deep breath, inhale and exhale, rock your body right and left, and settle into a steady and mobile sitting position. Think of not thinking. How do you think of not thinking? Non-thinking. So he didn't say not thinking or thinking. He said non-thinking. So what is non-thinking? How is that different from thinking? How is that different from not thinking? And then another example, a monk asked Yaoshan, what are you thinking in steadfast, immobile sitting? Yaoshan said, I think of not thinking. The monk asked, how do you think of not thinking? Yaoshan said, beyond thinking. So not thinking, not thinking, beyond thinking. Then the famous Korean Zen master Sung Song used to, I had a chance to practice with him, used to implore his students, keep an only don't know mind. A mind before thinking. So non-thinking, beyond thinking, before thinking. What exactly is being expressed here? What is this not knowing? So there's a very famous Japanese Zen master named Uchiyama Roshi, who was lived and practiced in the 20th century. And he wrote a book called Opening the Hand of Thought, where he tried to kind of explicate exactly what the practice of not knowing is, in everyday life. And he talked about it in the context of Zen meditation. So how many people here have a fairly regular daily meditation practice? It's not good or bad. I'm just curious. Okay. All right. So all of you are used to sitting on a fairly regular basis, it sounds like, and you're doing something while you're sitting. Okay. But what you're doing is really very important. And when it comes to the practice of not knowing and the idea of opening the hand of thought, it's a very specific instruction. Like when you're doing meditation, does your heart stop beating? No. Do your lungs stop breathing? No. Then why would we think our thoughts would stop thinking? Right? So the goal of Zazen is not to control your thoughts or make them stop or get attached to them. Okay. It's simply to see them, let go of them, and come back to your posture and your breath, moment to moment to moment. That is the practice of not knowing. Just coming back to just this. In Zen terms, we call it the practice of shikantaza, just sitting. Doesn't mean we try and stop thoughts or promote thoughts or evaluate what we're doing. We're just sitting, focusing on our breathing, focusing on our posture, paying attention to that. And invariably thoughts appear. And when you notice the thought has appeared, in essence, you've woken up to that because previously you were focusing on your posture and your breath. You just notice it. Oh, okay. And you come back to just this, just this. And that's the practice. It's not meditation. Dogen Zenji said, Zen practice is not meditation. Zen practice is coming back and waking up to the fact that you are already enlightened. But without the practice of not knowing, you won't realize it. And how do you realize it? by letting go of thoughts over and over and over again and doing what you're doing just as you're doing it. Another Zen story, Master Jizo asked Hogan, "Where have you come from?" "I pilgrimage aimlessly," replied Hogan. "Well, what is the matter of your pilgrimage?" asked Jizo. I don't know," he said. "Not knowing is most intimate," remarked Master Jizo. At that, Hogan experienced great enlightenment. When we're truly in the moment, without being caught up in thoughts, feelings, emotions, evaluations, and judgments, we are completely present. There's nothing more intimate than that. The separation between you and other falls away. And that is your natural human birthright. This might sound radical, but when you reach that place of not knowing, one of the first things you realize is there's nothing wrong with you. There's never been anything wrong with you. You're actually perfect, just as you are. And, you got a few things to work on, but. All right, let's talk about bearing witness now. So that's kind of some ideas around not knowing. So bearing witness is like the application of not knowing, right, to everyday challenges, life, experience, et cetera, et cetera. Zazen is a perfect example of bearing witness, okay? Because you're coming to that activity with a mind of not knowing, just being present for what's unfolding, staying with what is. There's a very famous Zen master named Huineng, who was the sixth patriarch of Zen, the first patriarch of Chinese Zen. And he had kind of an interesting slant on meditation. He taught a lot about correcting the idea that meditation is the only path to awakening. Because he had a much deeper, more fully realized view, which was that anything that you do without objectifying what the activity is, or the person, or the situation you're in, anything that you do where you drop the separation between subject and object, that is Zen practice. That is Zen practice. So Zen practice isn't confined to the cushion, right? Because what you're doing on the cushion, you can do in any activity in your life, anywhere, anytime, any place. I was trained as a behavioral psychologist, and one of the things that I got trained is how to develop and shape behavior. And once someone learns a behavior, that's not sufficient, because you have to teach them how to generalize that behavior to the actual world where they're going to have to use it, right? And the sixth patriarch was kind of talking about that. You can learn how to practice not knowing on the cushion, but that's not the end all and be all. It's taking it off the cushion and bringing it into your everyday life, where the real practice, not the real practice, but the continuous practice and realization occurs. My teacher, Roshi Burney, I'm going to share a quote that he wrote about. When we bear witness, we become the situation. Homelessness, poverty, illness, violence, death, the right action arises of itself. We don't have to worry about what to do. We don't have to figure out the solutions ahead of time. Compassionate action is the functioning of bearing witness. Once we listen with our entire body and mind, loving action arises. Anything we do without separation or denial, driving a car, cooking breakfast, taking out the garbage is practice or bearing witness. I retired a couple of years ago from the VA, and I had a bunch of different positions at the VA. I ran all the homeless programs in the state of Vermont for veterans, and they have the state of New Hampshire. I also was a suicide prevention coordinator for Western Massachusetts VA healthcare system for 4 years. And then I ended my career as a veterans justice outreach specialist, working with veterans that are accused of felony offenses and helping veterans who are incarcerated to prepare for release by working with them 6 months prior to the release date to get them housing, medical care, mental health services, peer support, et cetera, et cetera. So I had an opportunity to work with a lot of interesting people. And one of the folks that I had worked with, I won't reveal too much about his identity for confidentiality reasons, but was known to be a major white supremacist. And he had engaged in some hate crimes and was continuously all over the newspapers in Vermont. Whenever he went to court, and I would always have to go to court with him because I was his advocate. The press would show up, and on the news that night in the newspapers, there's always be a big article, Vermont white supremacist, blah, 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 right? So he became very quickly a pretty hated person. I don't know if anybody here from Vermont? Yeah, well, Vermont is a pretty liberal state, as you probably know. Bernie Sanders is one of our senators. Exactly. So in order to work with him, I had to let go of all of my ideas and concepts and views about white supremacists and whether he was a good person or not a good person. And this will sound radical, but my job was to try and help him understand the severity of what he had done and to accept responsibility. And using the VA services as a way to helping him to get to that place. And I worked with him for a couple of years. And he eventually ended up not going to jail, but was on probation with suspended jail time, which means if he violated his probation, he'd go right to jail. And it turned out, he was an interesting person. He had been severely abused as a kid. He joined the military to try and have some kind of a life after years and years of trauma. He was involved in 2 horrific combat tours overseas. And he also had Asperger's. So he had a lot of challenges, and by bearing witness to just being present to who he was, how he was, I was able to see that what was appearing before me was his life of conditioning, right? Unlike anyone else's life of conditioning. And it was important to work with those conditions without making him something other than what he actually was. It was pretty challenging. I'm sharing that not like to say, like, ooh, aren't I special or aren't I wonderful? It's not the intent, but to give you kind of an extreme example of how we can bring the 3 tenets to bear on difficult situations and actually find a way to create an outcome that serves a person rather than condemns them. I'll kind of share another example of bearing witness. This is a little bit of a kind of a Zen story. Back in the day, there was this famous Zen adept named Layman Pang. He wasn't a priest or a monk. He was a lay person. And he was highly realized, and he helped his wife and his 2 children to attain realization. And he gave away all his possessions, and he lived a very simple life. And he traveled around selling bamboo baskets that they put together as a way of sustaining themselves. And one day he was walking along the bank of the river and he slipped and he fell down, landed on his back. And his daughter, Lynchie, ran over to him and threw herself down on the ground next to him. And he looked at her and said, what are you doing? She said, I'm supporting you. In other words, she became that situation. That was the way she expressed bearing witness. And he kind of laughed. And probably, the situation had a little levity to it. But that's an example of bearing witness when we literally become the situation. Most intimate, right? Most intimate. No separation. All right, so bearing witness is coming to a given situation, oftentimes when there's a problem, for example, without fixed ideas, without having a sense of, I know how to fix this. I may know how to fix this, okay? But before I jump into that, I want to spend some time really deeply assessing what's going on. And that's where the practice of bearing witness comes in, okay? I have this tool bag and I have all these ideas and I have all these tools that I could bring to bear here. But before I immediately dive in and determine that I know what your situation is, I'm just going to be present with you and enter into a relationship with you. Okay. You ever notice when you really enter into a relationship with somebody and you have a problem that you can work it out? Somehow you find a way because you're working together, right? Like that white supremacist guy, I had to get into a relationship with him in order to serve him. Okay. So it sounds simple, but it's not, believe me, it's not. Because the power of conditioning is so strong. It's so strong, especially by the time we become fully functioning adults. And plus, our culture heavily supports the idea of always having an answer, right? Always having a way to fix it, right? As a matter of fact, if you hesitate, people almost look at you like, oh, what's wrong? You don't seem to understand, or, it's almost like if you can't come up with something right away, you're failing maybe in some way, or you're not meeting the mark, right? So bearing witness is like the antithesis of that. It's like dedicating yourself to not having an opinion until you spend some time just being present with what's unfolding. And oftentimes, if that involves an issue with another person, it's just asking them what's going on and listening, deep listening. Listening from the heart is bearing witness. Listening from the head, not so much. Okay, so if we are able to learn how to practice to let go of our fixed ideas, practice not knowing, that we can bear witness to situations as they arise without fixed ideas, just slow everything down and kind of let's see what's going on here, okay, before we do anything, right? Then the third tenet actually arises of itself. Bernie used to say, of itself, the fruit is born. That when you're in relationship with someone and you're bearing witness to a situation, something will appear. Something will appear. The question then becomes, but is it an appropriate response? Right? So a monk asked Yunman, what are the teachings of a whole lifetime? Yunman said, an appropriate response. What does that mean? An appropriate response. Bernie said, the point isn't to make ourselves holy. The point is to serve, to offer, to be the offering. Of itself, the fruit is born. Out of our Zazen, out of our bearing witness, the right action arises. We don't have to worry about what to do. We don't have to worry about what's right or wrong. If we function from the state of not knowing, if we bear witness, the offering arises and the fruit is born. Pretty radical, right? Compared to what our usual ideas are. Okay. It's hard to give up sometimes our ego attachment to what we know. Because in many ways, we spent many years allowing what we know to define who we are. And in Zen, the practice is to let go of that. So when you're doing Zazen, you're not gaining anything, right? You're trying to let go of what you already know. Not that thinking and concepts and ideas aren't important and valuable. They do have a function. Obviously, we couldn't function in this world without them. I mean, last time I checked, there aren't any raccoons on the surface of the moon, but we were able to get up there. So, this language and concepts and all that stuff is really powerful. But it also has a dark side, right? It has a dark side. And sometimes there's this question about, is all this conceptual understanding really ultimately benefiting us in the way we hoped it would? Or is there something missing that we haven't realized yet? And that something is the oneness and interconnectedness of all things, which makes us an individual, while at the same time, an expression of all that is. Okay. So an appropriate response. What is an appropriate response? In the context of what I just shared, an appropriate response is not right or wrong. It's not good or bad. An appropriate response in the context I've shared is simply understanding that whatever you do in each moment is who you are completely. Ever since you took your first breath, you're the only one who has lived every single one of your breaths. You're the only one. Your experience of the world, my experience of the world, all of our experience of the world is completely unique. No one has been with me every single moment of my life except me. The world that I live in is the world that I know, and I'm the only one that knows that world. So when I come to each moment, I come to that moment not only dealing with what is, but I'm bringing everything I've learned with me. So I can't help but do what I do, whatever I do when I do it. Because I can't step out of myself and be someone else other than all the conditions who have created me. Right? As much as maybe I don't like that. I may not like that I have a bad temper, but that's part of who I am. So maybe I need to work on that and change that. But I can't run from it. All right. So you guys are ready to do a little application? We're doing okay on time, Jeff? All right. So I'm going to give you a little case example.
We've got 15 minutes, Daikan.
Okay, perfect. All right, I'm going to do a little case example. And I want you to listen carefully and think of, where is not knowing showing up in this interaction? Where is bearing witness showing up in this interaction? And where is loving action showing up in this interaction? Or where is it not? So Tanzan and Aikido were once traveling together down a muddy road. A heavy rain was still falling. Coming around a bend, they met a lovely girl in a silk kimono and sash, unable to cross the intersection. Come on, girl, said Tanzan at once. Lifting her in his arms, he carried her over the mud. Aikido did not speak again until that night when they reached a lodging temple. Then he could no longer restrain himself. We monks don't go near females, he said to Tanzan. Especially not young and lovely ones. It is dangerous. Why did you do that? Tanzan replied, I left that girl there. Are you still carrying her? So let that sink in a little. I left that girl there. Are you still carrying her? Okay. So thinking about not knowing, bearing witness, and loving action, where are those kind of showing up in this encounter between Tanzan and Aikido, the younger monk? Any thoughts?
Well, seems like the first example of not knowing is when the monk dropped his ideas about females that he was taught and did the right thing or an appropriate response to. And I suppose he bore witness in that moment also and saw the situation for what it was and then carried her across the mud. Just seemed like the thing to do.
Very good, Peter.
Yeah. Just before the relationship part, but the initial.
Yep. Other thoughts? Thank you, Peter.
I didn't hear a moment where she said she wanted to be carried. She was just standing in the rain and the assumption was made. So there was immediate action without taking the pause.
Yeah, Steve. So like just direct connection with what is. No gap between what is and action. Other thoughts? And you got to turn on your mic.
I would say an example of keeping the ego in the situation and therefore moving away from what was right action is the other monk who continues to ruminate on the situation all day. I mean, if you're going to do an action, you do an action and it's over with and it's gone.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And I mean, think about this, contextually, right? So you've got this older monk, you've got this younger monk, right? And, the monks, they take a huge amount of vows. They're called the Vinaya. There's like, I don't know, it's a couple thousand, I think. I don't know the exact number, but it's a lot of vows that they take over a number of years. And so the younger monk, like a lot of us who are new in our job want to really do it correctly, right? So the younger monk has these really strong ideas about the precepts, right? One of the precepts says, touch women, you don't fraternize with women, especially monks. This is back in ancient China even, right? So forget about it. And imagine and the other thing is, they would go on these little pilgrimages, like from one temple to another to visit different teachers. And so they always paired an older monk with a younger monk. And the idea was the older monk would kind of show him the ropes, right? And so the younger monk is looking up to Tanzan, like, you're my guide, you're my model, you're the person I should be, paying attention to. And he sees Tanzan violate this precept, right? Now, the other thing that's important to know about this little story is when they were on these pilgrimages, they would take a vow of silence in the morning and keep that vow of silence all day until the sun went down. So this an encounter between Tanzan and this young woman happened early in the morning. So for the entire day, right, Akito's, in his head, spinning and spinning and spinning about this. How do we know that? Because the first opportunity he has to say something, he kind of confronts Tanzan and blurts this out, right? So what kind of hell was going on in his head all day? Right? What kind of hell was going on in his head? And isn't it that we often make these hells ourselves, right? Because we cling to fixed ideas. The one thing about the Buddhist precepts, which is unlike, perhaps the Ten Commandments or some of these other systems of moral behavior, is in Buddhism, they're not inviolable rules, they're guidelines. And what determines your behavior is not whether you follow the rule exactly to the letter, but what is the context? The context gives the behavior meaning, right? So he comes upon this young woman who's obviously distressed. She's got this beautiful dress on, doesn't want to ruin it, right? And instantly picks her up and carries her over and sets her down. Okay. So from that perspective, did he violate the precept? What do you think? Remember, the whole point of this practice and the functioning of realization is love and compassion and action for self and others. So who demonstrated in their behavior compassionate action? Was it Tanzan or Akito's moral indignation? And that was the lesson for Akito. I used to work at this place in the Midwest called Father Flanagan's Girls and Boys Town. And it was the largest residential treatment facility in the United States, pretty famous actually. And Father Val Peter was the executive director, and he and I got along pretty well. And he summed this up for me one day. He was a Midwestern guy, brilliant. He had spent 12 years at the Vatican. He was groomed to be a cardinal, wrote books, founded nonprofit corporations to feed the poor. He's an amazing guy. And I remember he came to, I was started Girls and Boys Town in New England, and he came out from Omaha and took me out to dinner at this beautiful Italian restaurant on Federal Hill, because he had spent 12 years in Italy, so he had this love for Italian food. And I was kind of going on with him about, this is happening and that's happening, and da-da-da-da-da-da. And he kind of looked at me one day and he said, Jimmy, you got to know when to hold them and know when to fold them. Just a beautiful wisdom teaching, right? Okay, so well, that's pretty much it. Any other comments or questions or anything I can answer? We got a few minutes left.
We've got 4 or 5 more minutes here if anybody has a question.
I don't have a question, but just thank you very much for putting all of that in context. It really gave me a different way of looking at some different areas of my life and how I can show up more present, maybe. And one particular area that I'm about to embark on that I've been ruminating about, to just be able to see it as just to let go of what my thoughts and worries are and listen with my heart. That's going to be really helpful for me going down the road. So thank you for that.
Keenan, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I mean, first off, thank you very much for sharing that. definitely a lot to chew on. Yeah, I guess what Steve mentioned resonated for me, that I guess, in this moment in 2025 in the US, I guess having feminism inform my thinking a lot, that the first thing that I noticed about the story was exactly the same thing of like, well, we don't know anything about this girl and what she wanted. Um, and I know it's like that's not what the what the story's getting at, and that probably the critique is more just kind of like a meta critique about how stories focus on men. I mean, do you think that it would be although not historically accurate, but in spirit accurate thing if we were to say there were two women walking down the street that were monks, and they came across a boy who didn't want to get his shoes, who was worried about the mud, and she picked him up and carried him across. I mean, do you think, like, is that uh the same as you see it?
Um, my response to that was I wouldn't make that much of it. You're making a lot there. You're making a lot. I think it was just he saw we don't know because we can only go with the written description. There could have been cues. I mean, there's 100 different ways you could go at this, you know what I mean, to try and manifest a certain point of view. I guess my view would be, maybe just kind of let go of all that and get with the spirit of what is trying to be conveyed. But you're right. I mean, it could be anything. We could switch the characters around, and we can do all of that if we want to. If that works for you, then if that's the way you see it, then that's awesome. Okay, anybody else?
I also just want to thank you for, your lived stories and conveying concepts really clearly and thoughtfully. And just in response to Keenan and Steve, I really appreciate that you're, and I think that's the challenge when we are looking at ancient texts. There's a context, and we understand that context, but I do think from a contemporary perspective, it's good to question these things through the lens that we live in.
Sure.
And while I appreciate, as you say, the spirit of the story, and it's very rich. It's also really wonderful that in contemporary Western Buddhism, that we also think about in the reality of our world and lives, how do we need to really embody those tenets, and then there are some new lessons and some different lessons that we will understand as Western people.
Yeah, I mean, the last thing I'll say about it is we should never leave anybody out. Everybody's included. All the different views are included. So any one perspective will invite some other counter perspective if that one perspective is something that we fixate on, and hold up as the truth. My teacher, Bernie, used to have a beautiful saying, which was, all I have is my opinions. I don't know the truth.